Thank you.
We're good? Okay, we are broadcasting, folks. Bring the committee to order. The Senate Minerals Business and Economic Development for Wednesday, 14th day of February 2024. Absent objection, we're going to shift the schedule around a little bit. Senate File 50, unincorporated nonprofit DAOs, DAOs. And with that, I'll turn some time over to Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to kind of move this up. We have some folks that have traveled here to provide testimony, and I wanted to make sure that we respected that time of those that were traveling. With unincorporated nonprofit DAOs, this is an important piece of legislation, and I'll invite some of the folks that have worked on this legislation up in a moment to come join us and kind of walk through some of the concepts. But I'll remind the committee that a few years back, we passed a DAO LLC Act, where we were the first state in the country to put in place a decentralized autonomous organization bill, which has been very successful. We've had over 500 registered DAOs in the state of Wyoming. You'd probably get that number from the Secretary of State's office in a few minutes, what we're exactly up to, and have received a lot of recognition. So there's been focus around establishing this type of algorithmically managed corporate structure through an LLC in the state of Wyoming, and it's been met with positive reception. But as the last few years have passed, the interest in the stakeholder community, those that are forming DAOs, have looked to a different model that has been the primary interest of that model. And it's what's called, as you see at the bottom of page 1, a decentralized, unincorporated, nonprofit association, a DUNA is what it's known as. So the Wyoming DUNA Act is what we have before us effectively. And this is regrettably longer than we'd like it to be, because we did not have, as we did previously, a portion of statute that we could just say, we're enacting that, we're using all of this, but we're also adding a couple of additional rules. That's what we did last time with the DAO LLC. We took existing LLC statute, and then we had some provisions that applied to a DAO LLC. In this circumstance with the DUNA, when we worked on it during the interim through the Blockchain Select Committee, we realized that there wasn't a workable construct already in our corporations law and statute. So we effectively started from scratch using existing Wyoming statute as a basis, using our work in DAOs as a basis, but building from the bottom up this approach to unincorporated nonprofit DAOs, or DUNAs as we call them, through decentralized unincorporated nonprofit association. So what this act does is lays out a structure for these unincorporated nonprofit associations, which again, you'll notice that this is technically not incorporated, but through the association, they're operating together. And if implemented in accordance with this act, there would be protections in place and clarifications in place about what the legal responsibilities of the members of that association are going to be, what the extent of their liability is, how they can manage voting, how they can manage operation among that association. And again, this is of great interest to stakeholders in this space. And so with that brief introduction, I'd actually like to bring up a couple of folks that have been working with us through the Blockchain Select Committee during the interim, if that's in order.
Let's check in with the committee. Any of the committee want to speak first? So let's invite the people up that you were just referencing. And just for the record, we skipped roll because we do have everybody present today on Senate Minerals. So.
Exactly, here. Mr. Kaufman, Mr. Jennings, if you all want to come up.
Come up, make yourself at home, introduce yourselves.
Absolutely. And yeah, please introduce yourself, provide a little bit of opportunity for background, and you'll recognize Mr. Kaufman. He's been serving on the blockchain task force and then select committee since its inception about 6 years ago.
And before you do, I just should acknowledge we have the chairman of the Public Service Commission here. Mary, thank you for being with us today. Great. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt Kaufman. I'm an attorney here in Cheyenne with the firm of Hathaway & Coons. I'm also a governor appointee to the Select Committee on Blockchain, and have served on that committee for a number of years now.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm Miles Jennings. I'm general counsel of Andreessen Horowitz's crypto funds. Andreessen Horowitz is a venture capital fund. We have about $35 billion under management within the blockchain and cryptocurrency area. We have about $8 billion under management, making us one of the largest venture capital funds in the space. And our business model is typically investing in startups, young people coming out of college, university, building new companies.
Thank you, Miles. Matt, do you want to kick it off?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman, and at your pleasure, do you want me to kind of walk through the bill or at a high level? Or
No, just give a little overview first, and then I'm going to bring it back to Senator Rothfuss to walk through the bill. So go ahead.
Absolutely, yeah, Mr. Chairman, as Senator Rothfuss said a few moments ago, on the blockchain committee, we've heard testimony over the past several years from a number of companies who are trying to utilize, obviously, this new technology to organize entities and organizations in new and novel ways so that they can interact. Senator Rothfuss said we worked on the DAO LLC as a subtype of LLC here in Wyoming a few years ago, which has been, I would say a successful endeavor. Certainly, we've seen a lot of use of that entity type, the proliferation of kind of the new advantages of utilizing blockchain for things like, corporate voting, corporate organization, just interacting with fellow members of an LLC in new ways. The problems, though, are that in the industry, there's a lot of need for essentially a nonprofit version of that entity that the LLC can't quite accommodate. And so this summer, we spent some time in the blockchain committee kind of hearing from some of the industry folks of that need, what they want to do. And I'm sure Miles will talk a little bit more about kind of some of the securities and some of the technical problems in the industry, but essentially this is a response to that. It's taking what already exists in Wyoming statute, which is the Unincorporated Nonprofit Association Act, and creating a separate version of that, permitting a decentralized version of that, much like we did with the DAO LLC. And again, as I've been telling a lot of legislators, we can think of this essentially as a nonprofit version to what we already did under the LLC Act.
Thank you, Miles. You want to complement that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess what we'll start with is just talking about generally why this is such an important thing for the industry and what it means for the development of the technology going forward. If everyone is familiar with Bitcoin, and that is Bitcoin is a great product, and it is one potential use case for blockchains. Another potential use case, right, is basically developing new digital services and products that people can use on the internet. So everyone is familiar with how Facebook and Twitter and products like those work. Essentially, over the course of the last 15 years, the entire internet has gotten consolidated into basically 5 companies, where 95% of the traffic on the internet now flows through 5 different companies: Google, Facebook, Twitter, and Amazon. And so as a result of that, you have massive consolidation. And really what has resulted from that is that these companies control massive networks, right? And blockchains are a new way to design networks where they're not controlled by any single monolithic corporation at the middle. The reason that the Unincorporated Nonprofit Association is a very helpful tool to facilitating a world that is not controlled by these main corporations is that the companies themselves that have these controls of these networks, their natural inclination, right, is to maximize shareholder profits. That's what their fiduciary duties are, right? And so as a result of that, they've done that by building these networks out as much as possible and then using them to make as much money as possible. They've been very successful, but that's ultimately been bad for users, and it's been bad for startups. There's very few startups get started now in the consumer internet business because that business is no longer really a dynamic place to build. So blockchains give us an opportunity to really reset how the internet works. And one of the things that we need in order to end up not in the same position we are here, right, is a new type of legal entity structure that doesn't force the members to maximize the profits of the legal entity. And so that's why the DUNA, the Decentralized Unincorporated Nonprofit Association, is really the key linchpin of kind of setting up that economic structure. You can think of it in a lot of ways as a homeowners association, essentially, for internet technologies, right? They're basically there. People can build within the homeowners association. They can add up to their property. They can profit off of their own property, right? But the homeowners association is meant to coordinate all of those homeowners within the group, and it's not really set up to make profits itself. So that's really what we're talking about, and really what entrepreneurs need in this space to create a neutral layer that then other entrepreneurs can build on top of. And blockchains form the key infrastructure upon which entrepreneurs can then build.
Thank you. Committee, any questions for Mr. Kaufman or Mr. Jennings? Let's do this. Let's have you two stay there, and let's check in first with the governor's office. Anybody want to testify? Anybody from any state agencies would like to testify? Go ahead, sir. Step up. You take that open chair right next to it. We're going to keep our key experts at the table.
All right, Mr. Chairman, my name is Colin Crossman. I'm with the Business Division of the Wyoming Secretary of State. And just really quickly, we don't see any concerns with this bill. We already have unincorporated nonprofits as a class. We would establish a subtype of unincorporated nonprofits that would be unincorporated nonprofit DAOs. So our system would effectively be able to use it as is with just some minor upgrades that I believe we have anticipated in the range of $1,800 to $3,200. And that falls within our ongoing maintenance budget.
How do you do those minor upgrades? What do you need statute change for that?
No. I'm just, the fiscal impact on our office is
Got it.
minimal.
Okay, thank you. All right, committee, any questions for this gentleman? Okay, not, thank you, sir. Anybody else would like to testify for this bill in the room? Go ahead. Good to have you back, Representative.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Tyler Lindholm, I'm the state director with Americans for Prosperity here in the state of Wyoming. And we're on and in favor of this legislation, specifically because Americans for Prosperity believes that innovation in tech actually improves lives. And by being able to find ways to set policies that allow these types of companies to act as good corporate citizens, that's a big step forward. And being able to find ways that they can kind of make our world a better place is always a high priority. But also on top of that, this is a big deal for the state of Wyoming at our Secretary of State's office as far as what their capabilities are in driving new businesses to the state of Wyoming to fix those potholes and build those schools.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Committee questions for Mr. Lindholm? No, we're good. Thank you. Anybody else in the room like to testify? Do we have anybody online for this? Okay. All right, let's go back and have Senator Rothfuss walk us through the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to walk through at a high level, and I would encourage the committee to call for a stop at any point if there's more detail needed, because it's a 46-page bill.
Just
And-
noticing that.
Yeah, and at the same time, I'd look to Mr. Kaufman and Mr. Jennings for some of the nuanced detail, but most of this language is nearly identical to other language in statute, with the exception of all of the amendments that are needed to that language so that it appropriately reflects DAOs as opposed to our existing unincorporated, unincorporated associations, nonprofit associations. So going through it fairly quickly, and I'll try and highlight some of the key concepts. You see on definitions, page 2 on to page 3, one of the key provisions is the Romanet 3, which looks at the decentralized unincorporated nonprofit association definition, which provides some qualities of that organization. And you see in A, it actually consists of at least 100 members joined by mutual consent under an agreement that may be in writing or inferred from conduct from a common nonprofit for a common nonprofit purpose, except as permitted under 1732-104. So the concept here is that you've got a relatively large number of associates joined through this association. And I believe that 100 is the same number as our other statute. I think that's where that came from. And honestly, that's something that has been discussed a little bit, is whether 100 is the right number. There might be some interest in lowering that. That's just something that I'd look to Mr. Jennings for what the right size is, but that's because of the existing statute. Has elected to form under this act, is not formed elsewhere. Digital asset is consistent with other legislation, as is distributed ledger, which gets to blockchain. On to page 4. You see established practices is a look back, governing principles. These are provisions that are elsewhere in statute for the old school UNA. As our membership interest, I believe, is similar, although you have the additional language about including the possibility of blockchain verification of membership interest instead of more traditional means. Person and record are traditional. On to page 6, smart contract. This is similar to elsewhere in statute. The smart contract is basically the set of algorithms, often on a blockchain or a decentralized ledger, that serve as the algorithmic guidance for the corporation for a lot of the features of it. Not all of those features necessarily, but they provide how that business might operate, how it might take in funds or resources or digital assets, what it would do with that under various circumstances. So that smart contract is the next generation of contract that's enabled elsewhere in statute through some of the work that we've been implementing over the past 6 years. Moving on to page 7, or bottom of page 6, page 7, this is again traditional corporate language from elsewhere in statute. On to page 7 towards the bottom, decentralized, unincorporated, or DUNA may engage in profit-making activities. This is kind of a key concept about an UNA overall, and this is the same. So it can engage in profit-making activities, but profits from any activities shall be used in the furtherance of or set aside for the nonprofit association's common nonprofit purpose. So if it takes in additional funds in a profit-making way, it has to use them for the internal purpose of the fund. Moving on to page 8, again, all standard and similar language to what we have elsewhere for nonprofits related to the members and paying reasonable compensation. Same thing on page 9, looking at real and personal property. Bottom of page 9 into 10, statement of authority as to real property. So it has the authority to engage with real property and then provides the provisions of that over the next 2 pages. On to page 12, same thing with liability and tort or contract. It provides mechanisms for how that liability can be assigned to members of the DUNA. And again, a lot of that is going to come down to the rules that are set forth in the organizational documents of that DUNA. But this kind of provides some default mechanisms and what is allowable in that. At the end of the day, though, if they have organizational documents that indicate how that liability is going to be assigned, that's pretty much how the liability will be assigned. But you see that there is limitations on liability for members of the DUNA that do not extend beyond the provisions of the statute and their proportionate share of the DUNA. Page 14 on to 15, we see capacity to assert and defend. Again, these are just traditional corporate language, more boilerplate from elsewhere in statute. On to 15, appointment of agent to receive service of process. Again, similar to other statute, but this gets into the DUNA having an agent in the state of Wyoming and the allowance for having that agent in the filing for that on page 16. On to page 17. Summons and complaint and how service will be applied to a DUNA. On to 18, claims. Again, traditional language, venue will be based on traditional language, but for purposes of a venue, a DUNA is a resident of a county in which the nonprofit association has an office, if there is one, or the agent authorized to receive service of process resides. So standard as we have elsewhere in statute. Again, standard language in 18 and 19 for UNAs. 20, same thing for expulsion of members, but these membership expulsion would be done algorithmically consistent with the nature of a DAO UNA as opposed to an UNA. So it goes into some detail about how that might be accomplished, but it's effectively parallel language, but using just decentralized ledger. Same thing with pages 22, talking about membership responsibilities. On to page 23, membership agency, where that member has no agency without authorization through the DUNA. Same, member interest transferable on 23. That's an interesting point that is, I think, one of the key provisions of a DAO UNA, a DUNA, gets to the fact of the transferability probably through a blockchain transaction where you have a very, say, fungible quantity or ownership that's easily transmissible through assignment of ownership or responsibility by blockchain, depending on the structure of the DUNA. But that, again, is kind of an upgrade from existing language. On 24 and 25, again, that's just a synthesis of what is otherwise standard language for approval of members, but now in the capacity of a DUNA. 25 on to page 26, utilization of distributed ledger technology, right? This is some new nuance talking about how its governance in whole or in part can be through distributed ledger technology. That's blockchain, smart contracts, the technologies we've been discussing. and that the governing principles may be laid out through the blockchain governance, either in full or partially, public or private, and it basically lays out the possibilities, the range of possibilities that are of interest for Aduna. 27 is again a relatively new provision that's not in the previous UNA statute, consensus formation algorithms and governance process. This gets to using voting mechanisms that are blockchain oriented, and that's a very common technological application of a blockchain, is very efficient and effective voting and consensus algorithms that might vary tremendously depending on whatever governance structure the entity actually has. Page 28, selection of administrators, rights and duties of administrators. This gets back to more traditional language, but in the context of Aduna. Page 30, right to inspect records. Again, sort of similar language, but in the context of Aduna, where a lot of these records will be electronic and on blockchain. And so it lays out who has access to what and how that will be done, and focuses on something which is similar to our DAO LLC, which is if the information is publicly available through an open blockchain, a public blockchain, that will suffice for provision of information. But otherwise, there are information obligations for requested associates. I'm hurrying as much as I can, Mr. Chairman. Again, please stop me if you have any questions. Page 32, indemnification. This is indemnification provision similar to existing statute, but in the context of Aduna, I don't think there's anything particularly novel there. And same thing with 34 on to 35, the winding up termination of the Aduna, which would occur in a parallel way to the same for an UNA traditionally. Page 37, mergers. Similar language for how a merger would occur, and this is one of the reasons why it's long, so it just gets into how that merger would take place. This goes on for quite a bit, but again is nothing more than an analysis of the surviving organization rights and the two original organization rights and how contracts are moved from one to another. So it follows in parallel existing statute, and that goes on for several pages. As does on page 45, conversion of entities, similar concept, but it indicates that a decentralized UNA may affect a conversion by complying with applicable provisions elsewhere in statute. So if it chooses to make a conversion to another form, it can do so. And that was it about as quick as I can, but I do want to defer to Mr. Kaufman and Mr. Jennings to see if there's anything I missed. Yep. Page
28, give me an
28.
example of what an administrator is, just so I understand it.
Excuse me?
Virtual, it's somebody in person, it's a building. What is an administrator?
Gotcha. An administrator is going to be one of the members of the associations, one of the associates that is given additional responsibilities within the association. So they might be a responsible party for managing the taxation, as an example, so that they have some enhanced role. They're not a traditional associate. They're going to be an administrative associate with various responsibilities. There can be a number of them. There can be an administrator. It depends on the structure of the organization.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufman or Mr. Jennings, either one of you want to compliment his work?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just jumping off what Senator Roth just said, I think the key key area of distinguishment from the typical UNA structure and the DUNA here, right, is in the typical UNA structure, you do have managers, a manager role as compared to an administrator. And we're very careful in the DUNA to move away from that managerial role, because we are not looking for an organization in which you are vesting, total control on a management team to then drive profits or what have you, right? Instead, we are looking for a clearly an ministerial role. Going back to my homeowners association example, really that's the type of power that you're really vesting in these people to, pay taxes, file tax returns, have some real world connection for this mostly digital entity. And that's really the kind of sole purpose there. And that also is beneficial from a securities laws perspective, right? One of the ways that the SEC has tried to target projects within this space is saying that there is reliance on some, management team that's really driving the value of the underlying digital assets. And so this is a way to kind of make a very clear distinguishment that this entity structure is not appropriate where, token holders are relying on a management team to drive profits for them.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufman, do you want to add anything?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to add something to what Mr. Jennings was saying. One of the real challenges in this space is trying to not run afoul of securities law. And so many of these digital entities, digital asset entities, find themselves in a confusing and challenging space. And that's one of the core reasons for a bill like this existing, where you can draw what are effectively bright lines to the degree that we can in statute and give comfort to an entity that there are layers of reasons why they would not run afoul of securities law. So that's one of the true values of this particular piece of legislation, is that last bit of bright line clarity that Mr. Jennings pointed out.
Okay, thank you. Did you have anything, Kaufman?
Mr. Chairman, I was only going to add on one thing. You might recall when we discussed the Dow LLC Act a few years ago, one of the big problems we were trying to solve at that time was when people organize in this way, utilizing blockchain technology, at common law, when a few people get together for a common purpose, you're deemed to be a common law general partnership. And under general partnership principles, every participant is responsible and liable for the entire debts and obligations of the entity. That was one of the key distinctions that and problems we were trying to solve with the LLC Act. One of the things I just wanted to call out about this administrator concept is just that we're authorizing that person to, as Mr. Jennings and Senator Rothfuss just said, to take certain actions, to be authorized to carry out certain functions without accepting the liability of the organization as maybe a member would.
Okay, thank you. All right, committee, do you have any questions? I'm going to go ahead.
Yeah, I just had one more question for Mr. Jennings, because I think it's important for the committee to hear, and that is, why this bill is needed from your perspective, and kind of the context of what the rest of the country is and isn't doing in this space.
Mr. Jennings, curious what the rest of the country is not doing.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. So what I would say is that this is a vital need that we currently have. There are all sorts of different vectors of attack that plaintiffs' attorneys and government officials can bring towards the blockchain and cryptocurrency space. And we're seeing that obviously at the federal level in many different ways. One thing that the federal government has done recently that also makes the LLC, Wyoming's Dow LLC bill, less suitable for the types of organizations that we're talking about is the Corporate Transparency Act went into effect on January 1 of this year. That rule requires legal entities like LLCs and corporations to report on their beneficial ownership, right? Their members, their owners, to the federal government, to FinCEN. That is a significant intrusion on individual privacy. Fortunately, the Unincorporated Nonprofit Association and the Decentralized Unincorporated Nonprofit Association is not subject to the Corporate Transparency Act. That's very important because it means you don't have those reporting obligations, which in most cases DAOs are not going to be able to comply with, given that their memberships extend over hundreds of thousands of members, most of whom are anonymous, and those memberships are changing every day as people buy and sell these tokens. So as a result of that, right, this solves a very key challenge that is now very recent and real for the DAO LLC bill. Otherwise, what I would say is that, right now for a startup that is building in this space, and generally, right, we have been, active in DC and in other states trying to argue, on behalf of startups to provide them with a very clear pathway for developing in this space, because it has been very murky and that acts as an economic drag on the space. Right now, there are all sorts of attacks that are happening against DAOs. For instance, in California, there are a couple different lawsuits that are happening right now where a holder of a token, right, a holder of a Bitcoin is being sued because someone else sold their token to someone and that person lost money, right? So they're completely devoid of any type of connection between the two people other than the fact that they own the same type of cryptocurrency, but one is being held potentially liable for the actions of another. That kind of vector of attack on the industry is one that would collapse any type of future development, because it would make it so perilous to invest in this space. So it really is unfortunate, and also it just makes it very difficult for founders to develop. If you're an entrepreneur right now and you're choosing which field you want to go into, would you want to go into one that is subject to all sorts of potential liability and regulatory uncertainty, or would you want to go work in an area where you have regulatory clarity? So this represents a significant step forward. Right now, startups in the space, in order to try and avoid some of these pitfalls, are spending upwards of $200,000, $300,000 to put in place, entity structures that don't pass the sniff test of being legitimate. These are foreign foundations that are being set up. They're moving assets into these vehicles from the United States, right? It creates all sorts of tax issues, and really, it's just fundamentally not a good situation. This bill, on the other hand, would represent a very low-cost, easily accessible way for people to set up DAO structures the same way that right now they can set up a startup, right? It costs no money to set up a C Corp or an LLC somewhere. This would just do the same thing for these nonprofit structures, which again is a very important kind of step in helping the further development of the space.
All right, committee, this is 46 pages. We're not going to go through each page. Any of you want to bring up anything in the bill that, any concerns at all?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have concerns about the bill, but I just want to inform the committee that I work for a law firm, and sometimes we represent clients that have interests in some of the bills, and I was just made aware that a colleague might be working on this bill, and so I don't want to vote on this bill at this time. We'll declare a conflict. I don't have an actual conflict, but to avoid the appearance of one, I think that's prudent action.
All right, wisdom. All right, thank you.
But my apologies to the committee. I did vote on this for introduction. I think it would have passed anyway, but my apologies. I just became aware.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate your integrity. All right, with that being said, let me double check one more time. Anybody in the room? Anything else? All right, let's proceed. Committee, you've heard the bill. What's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Moved. Is there a second? Moved and seconded. We're not going to go through the whole bill. Let's go ahead and take roll.
Senator Cooper.
Aye.
Senator Ellis.
Conflict?
Senator Jones.
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss.
Aye.
Chairman Dockstader.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, there are 4 aye and 1 conflict.
Thank you. Senator Rothfuss, you have all 46 pages for the Senate floor. Thank you.
Happy to. Thank you so much, and thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Let's, risk of having my bank loans pulled, we're going to put banking to the last. We're going to go to low carbon reliable energy standards. And I think Governor's office, we're going to let you kind of take the lead on this. Mr. Luthi? You have some amendments as well, so I thought what we'd have you do is walk us through the bill, do the amendments, and then for the record, folks, you have an amendment, a minor amendment put out in front of you, which we'll insert at the right time. But Mr. Luthi, you understand this piece of legislation? Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Randall Luthi. I'm the Energy Advisor for Governor Gordon. Thank you for the opportunity thank you for taking the opportunity to look at this bill. And if the committee will indulge me, which I now see some saying, please, no. But yes, if you would kindly indulge me, I'll take just a couple of minutes of how we got here. The bill is to amend HB 200, which was passed a couple of years ago. And you might recall at that time, we were facing a unique time with our coal industry. Wyoming and coal and electric power have had a long time partnership, and it always has been a partnership. Wyoming produces about 12 times more energy than we actually use. When it comes to electricity overall, we export about 60% of our energy. One of the major regulated utilities actually exports closer to 83% of their electricity. So at the time, we were looking at several regulations as well as commercial decisions and other states' decisions that they wanted to limit the amount of electricity, if not eliminate the amount of electricity they received as a result of burning coal. Those 3 states on the west all have either statute or by rule where they will either completely end buying electricity from coal or at least will greatly diminish the amount of electricity or phase it out as they move forward. The primary concern that they give us is CO2. Coal, when you burn it, does release CO2. Most fossil fuels do release CO2. That's just a matter of the way it is. So to address that, and frankly, the legislature started this a long time ago, long before I came to the governor's office, where they recognized that we needed to be able to produce electricity with a lower CO2 content. And frankly, it doesn't matter your views on climate change. It doesn't matter your views of the beneficial use of CO2. The fact is we're looking at currently at this time, a federal regulatory regime that is very interested in eliminating CO2, and many states and many consumers themselves are very interested in reducing CO2. So in order to keep our market, we believe it's very important to keep moving forward with being able to reduce CO2. HB 200 was the first of its kind. And it really is an unusual bill. It was actually patterned after states that have passed clean portfolio standards, where they would say a certain percentage of the electricity we're going to take has to be produced without, releasing CO2. So we took the opposite approach and said, utilities, you have not been evaluating the ability to use carbon capture units on your facilities. This is a bill which I would say was kind of a gentle nudge. They may not say it was quite so gentle, but actually a nudge saying, you're going to meet lower CO2 standards, and we want you to show us how you would do it through the use of carbon capture. So it's an evaluation bill. It doesn't say you have to do carbon capture, but it at least puts on front of the people who are regulating and to the consumers that they have looked at that option. Just to touch, you all know we produce more coal than any other state. 8 out of the 10 largest coal mines in the US are in Wyoming. We employ about 5,100 direct, 10,000 jobs. They're good paying jobs. Average salary is $83,000. We have 12 coal-fired plants and 17 coal-fired units. Wyoming ships coal to 26 other states. And frankly, it's all shipped for thermal use, meaning there are 26 other states using our coal to produce electricity. The biggest users are Texas, Missouri, and Illinois, and Wyoming comes in there as well. So as you look at our coal fleet, much of it is old. The average age is over 40 years old. How much time, effort are you going to take to, retrofit a 40-year-old coal plant? But many of these plants, we believe it's important that you look at them at how you could extend the life if you were able to use carbon capture. Ideally, HB 200 would provide the framework where a company could come into a utility and say, we're willing to put that on there. We're willing to pay for it. But frankly, the utility has to do some work before a company is really going to just take their word for it. What has changed since we passed 200, since you passed HB 200? 45Q, which is a tax credit for the ability to capture and store carbon or CO2. That has changed how most utilities now are starting to look at the possibility of carbon capture. I would say most utilities do not want to be in the carbon capture business, meaning of selling, but HB 200 did give that option that you could sell your CO2 and you could actually put that towards your regular profit, as a utility. As we look to the future, I do look for coal, frankly, to continue to produce, or that consumers will continue to demand lower CO2. In 1990, nationwide, 52% of electricity was from coal. In 1990. We're down to about 30% now, and probably closer to 25%. I think it's important that we take whatever steps we can so that we can continue to keep as many coal-fired plants as we can. Even Wyoming, in 2003, coal produced 97% of its electricity. By 2022, 71%. What has made the difference? I think wind has made a large difference. Gas has made a large difference. I believe the diversification of a broad energy-based fuel is a good thing. And at the same time, I don't think we want to throw out coal just because of CO2, when we have the ability to actually address the problem, as some consumers see it, as CO2. So once again, as you look forward in this bill, It's been in place for 2 years. I would tell you that it's working. Regulated utility companies have now been looking at CO2, looking at the possibility. They will say, they're going to report exactly what they're supposed to do, report what the costs would be, report what the effects would be. That's the purpose of the bill. We were approached with the idea of some amendments to the bill, and that is the bill that's before you today. And in general, what the bill does is changes some of the requirements. One is the reporting requirement that was 2030. I believe the bill takes it out to 2038. And that would be the first thing I would like to address with members of the committee today. As you look at the federal regulatory scheme, Environmental Protection Agency has proposed what most people call the Clean Power Plan version 2. The overall purpose of it is to reduce CO2. The secondary purpose and more snide purpose from my point of view is to eliminate fossil fuels in the overall generation of electricity. It does set up, it's not a final rule, it's proposed. So we do expect some changes. We expect the final rule will be out in April. But the layman's way to describe the rule is it actually sets up several dates where a company needs to decide, what are you going to do? Are you going to shut down? Are you going to switch to gas? Are you going to partially switch to gas? Or are you going to use carbon capture? Those older plants have to make a decision as early as 2030. And in order to make and they will have to implement that by 2032. Your other plants that probably are emitting less, you've got a little more time, 2035. But by 2030, let's see, read my own chart here. By about 2040, you have got to have in place any carbon capture that you're going to do. That sounds a long ways out, but frankly, it's going to come very quickly. So my first amendment to you is I would suggest that that in order for the utilities to really plan, should this rule take effect, we need to have our plans in place earlier than 2038. So I have put an amendment for you of 2034. And since I heard this presentation this morning on the Clean Power Plan, I'm actually going to ask you to make it 2033. So it would be a 3-year extension.
Repeat again your page
Right.
number.
I'm sorry, that would be page 3, line 18. Page 3, line
And
18.
you want the year to be what again, sir?
Strike 2038 and insert 2033.
Okay.
We've looked at the other amendments, or some I'm not too crazy about, but the other one I would suggest is somewhat, I think it's just clarifying, and that's on page 5, line 19. Now, one of the things we hear about from companies that would possibly and are interested in building a carbon capture unit that could be strapped onto a coal-fired plant is that they need certain work done. These are things like feasibility studies, front-end engineering and design studies. It would be helpful to them if the utility company does those studies. So what the amendments do in front of you is allow some of those things to be done under the guise of HB 200. On line 19, it talks about exploration of carbon capture. I believe a better term would be testing. So page 5, line 19, strike exploration, insert testing. I think that is more definite if they're going to do that, and it's easier, I think it's easier to justify. We're not really exploring, you're already to the stage where you want to test this technology.
Would you repeat that, Randall, the exact change you want to make?
I will, page 5, line 19. Strike exploration, insert testing.
Okay.
So let's talk about that technology. Currently, the best known technology is probably the amine technology. It's an amine that actually works with a solvent. I believe I got that right? Yeah, so yeah. I'm an expert practically on this, but Petra Nova was the first plant in Texas to actually have it at a commercial scale. The plant ran for a while. Technology seems to work fine. They ran into market issues in the price of oil and how long it took them to get. The market plan was to deliver CO2 to an oil field for enhanced oil recovery. The good news is they're back up and running. Frankly, Norway has been doing a form of carbon capture probably since 2012, I believe, on one of their offshore gas wells. So the technology is available, that technology. Wyoming long ago, in the wisdom of the legislature, established the Integrated Test Center up in Gillette. And it was to test other technologies that might work. We currently have 3 companies that are looking at different ways of capturing carbon. Unfortunately, most of those tests will not be, we will have results starting within a year or two, but it's probably 2037, 2038, probably longer than the Clean Power Plan version 2 gives us to actually be able to have those commercially viably ready. But at least we will have other options to look at. So that's kind of the integrated way Wyoming has been looking at carbon capture. We're providing a testing facility to find more. We've provided a bill to encourage utilities to look at it. So that's where we are with HB 200. It was never meant to be set in stone. I welcome working with the utilities on what amendments can actually make it more usable and get us to the end goal. And that is, let's get some carbon capture units on coal-fired plants. If we do that, there's no reason that technology cannot be exported to other states, those 26 other states that currently rely on Wyoming coal, and other countries as well. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you. We're going to have you stay at the table. You may need to move down depending on who all comes up, but stay close, Randall.
I would be happy to.
Committee questions for Mr. Luthi. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 questions. The first is with regard to retrofitting with amine scrubbers or any other technology, but that's, as you know, what's out there right now is proven. Does seem to be the focus of this. Over the years, though, there have been, I think, much more viable, although not yet proven at scale, technologies that relate to pre-combustion capture and just alternative techniques to coal combustion. But that doesn't seem to be a part of this, or would you say it is and that it's just not emphasized?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I would say it is, but not emphasized. As I recall reading the bill, again, it does not require a particular technology. I think most utility companies take a very conservative view in that they will attempt to do the technology they think is furthest along on the readiness scale. Certainly, and some of this language that we talked about on the amendment, I believe will help open that up.
Okay. And one more question, Mr. Chairman. The discussion about adding more flexibility to the utilities to engage in, for example, testing pilot projects, developing the FEED studies. It seems to me that if this is an allowance that can potentially go into a rate base over time, this is an authorization for that, as I understand it, in the probing phase. Is that, first of all, is that accurate? That's how you see that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, yes. The bill originally established that you could put in that rate base, but the legislature also put a cap on how much that could be.
Well, here's my question then, Mr. Chairman. So in that circumstance, and we had this discussion previously that there's about an 8%-ish profit built into the rate base. So if the FEED study, and this is low, cost $100,000, and that's what the FEED study was going to cost, it's my understanding that they'd be able to bill out $108,000 for that FEED study. I think the PSC disagrees, which is good to hear, and I want to hear why the PSC disagrees.
Definitely disagree.
That's good. And so I guess the question then, and I'll ask this of the PSC, is if this is something which would go towards that profit calculation, yes or no? And you may not know as well as Commissioner Throne, who's shaking her head.
Let's do this. If it's all right with you, Mr. Luthi, we'll have you slide down. We have two commissioners in the room, and they will answer that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I will take a lifeline at any time, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, commissioners, would you like to step up? Both of you? We miss anybody else? What we got?
In fact, we have three, if you'd like
Three,
me to
that's
just
right.
move
I
out
apologize.
completely. Yeah.
Do you want all three? Okay. The nod is, Commission Chair Throne, would you carry it away?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did you want me to respond to
Please,
Senator
right out of the gate.
Rothfuss's question? Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, to respond to that question, our view is that right now in the preliminary phases, we're in a cost recovery phase, so they are allowed to come to us to seek a surcharge in advance of incremental costs, and that it would be a cost recovery exercise. So for both Rocky Mountain Power and the Black Hills companies, we've approved a nominal surcharge to cover the costs, the preliminary costs that they're intake, but that is not in rate base. Something gets built, then it's a different conversation.
Really quick, let's.
So to
check.
clarify then, in
Wait,
that,
wait, just a sec. Fellow Commissioner, would you like to? Mr. Petrie?
Mr. Chairman, no, I
Okay, all right.
to clarify then, that surcharge does not have the built-in rate of return that goes to rate base. Okay, thank you for that information.
All right, any other questions from the committee? Well, we have the commission, then anything in general you'd like to say on this piece of legislation?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, senators. Just wanted to offer a couple of technical suggestions.
Okay.
So if you look at page 4, line 22, I just want to bring this topic to the committee's attention. Don't really need an amendment at this point, but SF 22, which is one of the corporation bills, it's still in committee. It also amends some of this reliability language. It doesn't add, or it doesn't amend paragraph A. So I think what we will suggest to them tomorrow is we like your language. And there's some of their language that we'll propose they remove. So I'm just flagging
So
that right
Commissioner, how do we
now.
make sure we sync up the two pieces of legislation?
Well, if you want to, Mr. Chairman, if you want to sync up the two pieces of legislation, I would leave what you've proposed in A.
Okay,
And then they have they've proposed a new D, and it will be our suggestion to them that they remove the D.
okay, thank you.
And then I
Tracking that?
believe the mills will mesh together. I'll double check that, but I don't think there would be a problem then.
Thank you. Further questions for the commission? Go ahead, Commissioner.
Turning to page 5, line 18 through 23, and you can tell that we haven't had a chance to talk to Mr. Luthi this morning. I don't disagree with this change if you keep the language there, but it's our view that you don't need any of this new language. We can already do this. We basically look at the prudence of the costs. And so there's nothing in our view that prevents us right now from finding prudency of any of these things listed. And personally speaking, it always makes me nervous to put a long list of things in statute, because then you run into what you can do if something's not on the list.
So Commissioner Throne, your counsel is to pull that new language?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would just say delete all of that new language,
All right.
because I don't believe we see anything on the list.
Could we have Mr. Luthi weigh in on that proposal?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I leave that to the wisdom of the committee. I believe the company that suggested these amendments felt that it would be helpful to have additional clarity of what they can and cannot do. And I've always had great respect for the PSC and the OCA as they look at these projects and costs that come before them, to take a hard look So I have to admit, Mr. Chairman, after babbling along, I don't have strong feelings either way.
Thank you.
Chairman?
With that, the wisdom of the committee.
Mr. Chairman, I don't like lists either, but, we're down this path. And then I also don't like saying including but not limited to, but maybe that's a solution. If we included some qualifying language on line 18, just to address the commissioner's concern.
You hold that and get ready for it.
So I'm wondering, though, if that would be helpful.
Let them mull that, you get ready with that change.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis and Deputy Chair Petrie had the exact same thought at the exact same time, because
You have a friend.
that was the note he just wrote to me. So that also works.
All right.
I like clean statutes, and we have flexibility,
go with the
but
two.
I would defer to the wisdom of the committee as well.
Okay. All right. Continue on. Anything else?
I always want something else, Mr. Chairman. No, I'm kidding. 2 weeks vacation would be nice. But Mr. Chairman, this one is also just a technical change on page 6, line 17 to line 18. Just delete that language. It's language in rulemaking that we don't need, and sort of calls into question the rules we've already adopted. I mean, if this bill passes, we will update our rules accordingly. So I don't think it's necessary. So I would just delete that. Require public utilities to file reports too.
Okay. Anything else?
I think that was all, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Along those lines, I wish we had this a little bit sooner, because I like shorter bills, and if we had made all those changes, we'd have one less paragraph and the bill would be even shorter. So along those lines, on page 7, paragraph E, right now, I'm wondering who you report to. When you read this, the commission shall report to the legislature. Who are you reporting to? I'm guessing it's us, but we need to keep all that language in there too. I guess there's an addition of political subdivisions, but I am curious who you're reporting to.
Your thoughts, Mr. Luthi, on that one?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was thinking I saw language somewhere that actually made you the committee that it was reporting to. So that certainly
don't
would
recall
be
that language.
the most.
You want to be ready to change? Okay. All right, with that, anything else from the commission? All right, thank you. In the interest of time, let's check the room for any comments. Comments from the room? Go ahead, sir. Thank you, commissioners.
Thanks, Chairman Dockstetter and members of the committee. My name is Anthony Ornelas, and I'm the Administrator of the Office of Consumer Advocate. And with me, I have our Deputy Administrator, Mike Blakely. And some of the comments that we have, the ground has just recently been plowed, but I would like to touch on them real briefly. And before doing that, I would just like to remind the role of the OCA, which our main job is to advocate in favor of ratepayers, issues regarding rate impacts on those ratepayers. And it is in that vein that I provide those comments. So beginning on page 3, lines 10 and 11, I would just like to encourage you guys to include that, and I believe that is a strong provision of this update to exclude utilities with under 10,000 customers.
Line, please.
Starting page 3, lines 10 and 11.
Okay.
This would exclude utilities that serve under 10,000 Wyoming Electric customers. And mainly this would exclude Black Hills Power and leave into this program Rocky Mountain Power and Cheyenne Light Fuel and Power. So I would just like to comment on that I do support that amendment there. Based on the current cost estimates that we have for CCUS, utilities such as Black Hills Power, which currently serves about 3,000 customers, it just becomes pretty unwieldy and pretty substantial rate impacts. Even in the initial phase, the study phase, the pre-feed study, the feed studies that Mr. Luthi talked about. So I encourage you to consider that there as an appropriate amendment there. The next one I would just flag, Mr. Luthi had already flagged, but it was one that was in my comments as well, as reducing the 2038 deadline, and that would be on lines 18 of page 3. as he spoke of, the federal government has recently implemented both an ozone transport rule and is reviewing Section 11 of the Clean Air Act. And frankly, if we keep it at 2038, my fear is there won't be any Wyoming coal left in which this bill would be applied to. So appreciate Mr. Luthe's comments on that. So the next comment I have is regarding page 5, line 20. And again, this was just discussed with Chairman Throne. So to the extent that language goes away, it may alleviate my concerns. However, I would point you to the implementation of carbon reduction pilot projects.
Where you at, sir? Page 5?
Page 5, line 20.
Gotcha.
The implementation of carbon reduction pilot projects. My concern there is that I would ask for your consideration for the potential rate impact that this could have on Wyoming ratepayers. As we have heard today, there are a handful of technologies that are generally considered to be commercially viable. The amine-based technology, the cryogenic technology, and there are a number of other pilot projects that are out there. Here recently, Black Hills Energy has been awarded approximately $16 million from the WEA for one of these types of pilot projects, which could be considered to be a little bit farther beyond the scope of the original HB 200. It is a program essentially to take coal and through a...
That section may be pulled anyway, so.
Yes, sir. So to the extent that it is, but including pilot projects like that could add additional layers of cost for technologies that are generally not going to result in a viable CCUS technology on Wyoming coal plants. So I would ask for that consideration to the extent that language remains. My last set of comments is simply for maybe future consideration by this committee for some clarity in the original HB 200 bill and the version in front of us today. And that would start on page 6, lines 6 through 15. And I will simply paraphrase this. It was our understanding, at least in my office and many that I spoke with, that the rate impact limit of HB 200 is 2% for each utility. However, the language the lines that I have recently cited has called this into question, both in my circles as well as conversations with utilities and other interested parties as to whether there is truly a 2% cap, or if that is just the starting threshold and there could be perhaps an unlimited cap based on the language in line 6.
Do you have a proposal for language, or do you want to eliminate something?
I do not have a proposal at this time. I bring it to your attention perhaps for future consideration for clarity on this bill as we move forward with feed studies. So
Committee on that?
with that, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Did your colleague have any comments?
Mr. Chairman, no, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you. I did have a question. I wanted to follow up on that. So in the OCA's opinion, it is ambiguous because I've seen it so that you can take it both ways also. And I do find that the paragraph, the way it concludes on page 6 at the end, when it says the commission shall take such actions as necessary, notwithstanding any other provision of this section, to ensure the public utility is able to recover its prudently incurred incremental costs and customers are not charged for those incremental costs other than through the rate recovery mechanism specified in the subsection.
Sir?
With the notwithstanding, to me, it isn't ambiguous, even though it says two different things. Notwithstanding says, you look here, this wins. So that's how I've interpreted it. Do you have a different view?
Yeah, go ahead.
Chairman Dockstader, thank you, Senator Rothfuss. I believe there's just some ambiguity, as you mentioned it. I've heard it read both ways. My concern is that we have a real money that is about to be spent on these, and some of the feed studies that you mentioned, the estimates are about $10 million per unit. In some cases, those may push the 2% threshold or exceed it, and it's, I guess, somewhat unclear as to how it should be read. So that is why I flag it for perhaps some clarity if needed as we strive towards the next steps in these processes.
Thank you. Okay.
And presumably, or maybe not, but has the OCA done an analysis of a projection just based on, Boundary Dam costs, Petronova, any of the other projects, on what the increase would have to look like to fund a retrofit of an amine scrubber or something along those lines? Is that something that the calculation's been done for?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Dockstader. Senator Rothfuss. So the OCA has not engaged in its own third-party or independent analyses. We are really relying on the steps taken by these utilities. There's really only a handful of engineering companies around the U.S. that are truly qualified to do that. So the initial estimates we've heard for some of these technologies are upwards of $1 billion per unit. There would be other considerations, such as the parasitic load that these require on the unit. How would you replace that capacity with new gas-fired or wind or some other resource, as well as impacts to the net power cost and the use of fuel, which would, at this point, primarily be directed towards Wyoming ratepayers only.
Mr. Chairman, quick follow-up.
One more.
I think that gets, though, at this is a problem, a concern I've had with House Bill 200 all along is kind of this forest versus the trees type concept. What you just described, that $1 billion number, that's the number everyone uses. It's $1 billion to build that unit, and that would be for one unit of Jim Bridger, for example, or wherever else you're putting it. And I realize there are a lot of other nuances in the details of the additional costs that might be associated, but you've got your $1 billion to start with. And I guess that's what I'm wondering is what it looks like just from a back of the envelope calculation. Is House Bill 100 in any way plausible under any circumstance for that type of approach where the entirety of the burden is borne by the ratepayers of Wyoming? It's an over $1 billion project. What does that pencil out to as the OCA when you're looking at that on behalf of the consumers? Because I think it's important for us to realize that nobody talks about that because we want this to work. But at the end of the day, that seems like the calculation we should all be doing.
Go ahead.
Chairman Dockstader, thank you, Senator Rothfuss. So for clarifying point, I believe you were referring to HB 200. Yes, so I can give you some rough estimates, and that's why when we talk about excluding the 10,000 customer threshold, so for a Black Hills Power, there's been some rough estimates of a rate increase impact of 300% to 500% if we were to perform with the information we currently have. I'm not sure for the Rocky Mountain Power units and the Cheyenne units that we're really far enough along, especially with the updates to the 45Q tax credits. We're kind of in the step where we're hoping the next reports will be filed towards the end of March, and that we'll have a better idea. One of the potential issues there is there's a lot of hands in that cookie jar per se, because we have to capture the carbon, we'll have to have somebody transport the carbon, then we'll have to sequester the carbon, and there could be unitization and several landowners. So everybody will likely want a piece of the credit or some way to make that economic for their slice of this process. And it's just too early to say beyond some of the high level estimates such as the Black Hills Power that I've given you.
Thank you.
Let me insert here for just a moment and look ahead for just a second. We got anybody in the room that has traveled for the banking bill? Has traveled. That being said, we may move the banking bill back to Friday because we do have some time on our schedule. Some of the bills were killed on the floor, so we have some ample time to work with this. With that being said, let's come back and we may save working this bill till Friday, but let's make sure that we've got anybody else. Does the committee have anything else for these gentlemen here? Black Hills, you've been brought up a lot in this discussion. Do you want to talk?
Are you willing to?
Well, this one was still on. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, David Bush representing Black Hills Energy. And yes, we were one of the kind of proponents of this legislation. We worked it through the interim with this committee. Couple of points that I would bring up, I guess. Senator Rothfuss has asked a lot of good questions, one of which about the technology side, and OCA Administrator Ornelas touched on it. We've got the amine process, cryogenic, which is about a level. So the different levels of commercial readiness, 9 or 10 is pretty much we're ready to go. Amine is at a 9, which is why it's at Petronova and some of the other plants. Cryogenic, which actually, from what I've been told by our engineers, is a better suit for our plants, is only at about a level 6. So it's still a ways out. One of the other processes that has been brought up that we are engaged in is a coal to hydrogen project that, again, this committee has heard about. We're taking coal and not burning it, but basically, and Senator Rothfuss can help me with the technology side on this, but we're basically extracting the water and the hydrogen, and it creates a process where there's no emissions. So it's a chemical looping process that we think might be a future for Wyoming coal to answer some of the questions about CO2 emissions that seems to be the bugaboo on why we're facing these problems with our product throughout the country. So on page 3, line 15, you'll see coal-fueled generation unit. That's where we answer that question about other technologies. So we're still using coal, but it's not coal-fired, it's coal-fueled. So,
Okay.
so that's how we kind of answer that question of, let's find the technology that works the best. And I don't know, we're good with the changes that the governor's office has brought up. On page 5, there's been some questions about that language, the new language there at the bottom. The PSC has asked for that to maybe be removed. I think for us, that part of it was, as Mr. Luthi pointed out, just trying to understand exactly what our stipulations were and what we would be able to do under that. If the PSC believes they have this already, I think we're probably okay with that going away. There's been some other bills that we've talked about where it's yes, we can already do this, but having it in statute is nice too. So we can go either way on that, whatever the preference of the committee is there.
Committee, any questions, comments? Okay. Anything else?
And I think, Mr. Chairman, that's really the high points. It's as Mr. Luthi has pointed out, this is changes that we see would make it more applicable and make it more possible for us to get a carbon capture facility on the ground up and running in Wyoming. We're moving forward with research and feed studies and engineering studies to get the technology there, aligning with 45Q. There's all sorts of sections of this bill that we worked to the interim to get us there. So,
Speaking of time, how much time before you would make this all happen?
that is a great question, Mr. Chairman. We are, like I said, going through the engineering right now. We put out an RFP to get some idea of what's out there. We sent our proposal out to, I don't know, a dozen or so companies, and a couple of them basically wrote back and said, you're too small. What the unit that we're looking at is 100 megawatts. So they're mostly the firms that can do the technology are looking for bigger coal units. But at this point, we're continuing to work through, and we're hoping within the next, several years, we can get something on the ground. I can't really give you a hard date at this point, but
Small, that's it.
progress is going, and we're not sitting around on our thumbs, that's for sure.
Let's do this, folks. We're out of time. So let me check and make sure that there's anybody else that have traveled for this bill that we should take care of. Did you travel in for this? We're going to give you 2 minutes, cover it? Okay, we're going to let you speak, and then we're going to pick this up again on Friday because we've got a lot of time on our schedule. And let's let you, where you've traveled, let's have you come up, speak quickly, and then we're going to hold this over till till Friday. And while you're sitting down, we had people on the Zoom for this. Are they?
Mr. Chairman, we do have one online requesting to testify on the specific
Okay,
bill.
let's have you speak for just a moment, and then we'll go online, and then we'll hold this over. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chair and committee members, thank you. My name is Elena Campbell. I'm down here from Sheridan, 4th generation, come from a ranching family. I appreciate your overall 40,000-foot view of kind of saying, where are we going with this? Why did we start with it? HB 200. We have so many questions about this, and yes, and this does go to the end users. Ultimately, the whole notion that CO2 is too high in the first place is probably answered with this nice little chart, which you'll see in Senator Steinmetz's presentation. We're down here, and it's so low that it's not good enough for our flora and literally supporting life. So I have no idea why we're doing all of this. It's costly, it's ineffective, and it's dangerous. We haven't looked at these amine proposals, or we have no idea what the long-term safety of all of this is. I don't know why we're barreling down this path. I also want us to consider Wyoming sovereignty. Wyoming sovereignty. You guys are protectors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's check. Can the person on Zoom rejoin us on Friday, or do they have to speak now?
Mr. Chairman, I will promote them to a panelist and let them answer that question. if
Okay,
you'd like.
come on, and bring them on then for a moment. Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, just, you can either make your comments very quick or rejoin us on Friday.
If I rejoin you on Friday, Chairman, how long would I have?
Probably 3 or 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay, I can wait till Friday. What time would that be?
That'd be fine. Could you state your name for the record?
Yes, Carrie Agan.
Thank you, Carrie. Now our staff knows you. Okay, Carrie, thank you. All right, with that, folks, we're going to adjourn. Appreciate your patience, but these are complicated matters and they deserve more time. So with that being said, we'll adjourn until Friday. We'll pick up on Senate File 42 for those listening on the record, and then we'll take on Senate File 41, Banking Division Classification and Salary Exemption. We do have time for those two bills, and appreciate all the input. Anything else from the committee? All right, we stand adjourned until Friday. Thank you.